Hello, everybody. Just getting all my screens coordinated here so we can get started. Let's see here. Oh, looks like I'm getting audio. That sounds good. Anybody here in the chat can want to confirm that they're seeing and hearing me? Everything looks good. And then I'll get started here in a couple minutes. Okay, welcome if you're just joining. I'm going to get started here in a couple minutes. Sounds like everything looks good. Sounds good. Can you hear me okay? All right. Excellent. Okay, well, let's get started here. And of course, I'm going to record this as well. All right, well, let's get started. So, my name is Rob Shea, and what I want to do today is take a walk through my new book, Color Doesn't Exist, A Practical Guide to Infrared Photography. For anybody who's interested, but uncertain what this is going to consist of, this will be a great opportunity for you to see some of the book, see what the contents are, see what you're getting yourself into as you get into it. And then as well, I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. Could be questions about the book, could be questions about infrared photography in general. We'll try to cover those as well throughout this. So let's take a little moment back through history. If we go back to a period of time about 23 months ago, Illumigraphic had posted this comment into the live stream here. Let me change my view here so you can see it better. Another fine video, Rob, waiting for you to do a book next, which is so needed for infrared, hint, hint. And of course, my response was, a book, intriguing. So that was very intriguing to me. I really kind of liked the idea of that. And here we are, 23 months later. And so done. So it took a long time, long road to get here, but finally made it. So what I'd like to do is we'll kind of step through this, and I'll talk a little bit about the book, and some of the history and the process that got to this point, and then some of the tools that some of the things that you can do while you're looking at the book as well. So let's get started. So I want to kind of walk through. So I'm using Adobe Acrobat Reader because the book is a PDF, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well as we go, and some of the things that you can learn from this. So here's a cover, of course, Big Sur, one of my favorite photos, and right, let me see here, right there on my wall as well. So if you're looking here, I got a nice metal print of that as well. All right, so quick note here, a really quick thank you to Allison and Tony. One of the things that's interesting when you embark on an endeavor like this, as an author, there's sort of this sense of independence and ownership, and wanting to do something yourself, and of course that really drove the early stages of this. But this would not be where it was without the support of other people and the collaboration of other people, particularly Allison and Tony, my editor and designer, who helped validate all the facts were correct and dealt with all the little nuances, and made it look good. And so this is really a collaborative effort, and I really appreciate not only their involvement, but of course everybody in the community who commented on my videos, asked questions, and did all of those things. Truly, collaboration with lots of people. This is not anything that could come from a single person. So I really appreciate everybody's involvement. So, fancy fancy blank page, all very professional. So this first of all, we'll take a look at the table of contents. Here's an image I shot last year at Cedar Breaks. It's kind of a panorama. There's a number of panos in the book. I'll talk about those as we get to them. So let's kind of break down the structure of the book and what we're getting into. So what I've done is I've organized the book into a number of major sections. And if you can't see all these in the live stream, that's okay. If you go to infraredbook.com, the website for the book, I've got a list of these as well. So you can read them there if you can't read them on the live stream. So basically what I wanted to do is structure the book in kind of a way that logically made sense for, both new shooters and experienced shooters. So it could be a guide for people who are just getting into infrared, but also could be a reference for people who are already experienced in infrared. So we start getting beyond the front matter stuff. We get into the quick start guide. So this is the first section. This is a space for people who are new and just want to dive in. They don't want to read a whole book before shooting something. I can relate to that. So the quick start guide will get you there. The foundation section is kind of the why. So talking about, what is infrared light? What are the different styles of infrared photography? And then what is color temperature, which is a pretty core concept for infrared photography. And then section 3 is all about equipment. So this is the gear. So this is, do you want a converted or an unconverted camera? What kind of filters do you want? Infrared filters, ultraviolet filters even, visible light filters. What are the different form factors of filters? What are my recommendations for filters? And then of course lenses is kind of another key component for infrared as well. Section 4 is about shooting. So this is, what do you do when you're out in the field? What do you do how do you focus? What are the things you have to be aware of, like diffraction? Do you have to set a white balance? And then starting to think about different things like light, your subjects, and what color is going to happen. Section 5 is the big one. Section 5 is all about developing. So there's 9 chapters in this section, so it's pretty substantial. So starting with monochrome processing, which is relatively easy compared to color processing, and then diving into all of the different nuances of color processing, from profiles, white balance, different methods of color swapping, color balance, color grading, different editors, kind of all of that stuff. And then as at kind of an advanced level, color space and how that will affect your images. So then some final thoughts that I have in that final reflection, and then in the appendices, kind of breaking down. This is kind of a reference section, so talking about the profiles that I used in the book, so that if you look at an image and say to yourself, well, how did that happen? How did he get to that point? You could see there's a reference. Each image, let me go back a page here. Each image will have a profile name next to it, and it's might look like if you're not familiar with these, it looks like kind of an abbreviation, kind of a cryptic abbreviation. But you can go into this profiles appendix and look it up, and then see the backstory behind how that profile came to be. So that's kind of a helpful guide if you want to sort of reverse engineer any of the photos in the book. A style of cameras, different filters, cameras, a glossary of terms, because there's a ton of terms that are used, not just some photography terms, but terms that are specific to light and infrared, and then a big bibliography, a bunch of further reading if you really want to dive deeper, and then some information about me. All right, so let's move on. So we'll get into the first section, which is the quick start guide. There's a preface, still kind of front matter, some images. What you'll notice here is that there's this was designed as a 2-page spread. So when we get to the print version of this, then this image would be on the left face of a 2-page spread, and then this would be on the right side of a 2-page spread. It'll look very nice once we get to the print part. Looks excellent. Thank you very much. So this is the introduction. I've got there's a little blue box here that at the beginning of each chapter with a quote. A few of them are from me, but some of them are from other sources. So there's a little bit of fun if you can decrypt where some of those sources are from. Some of them relate to color or different, songs or movies or things that, kind of have topics that relate to light and photography and infrared. So a little bit of fun there for you to decode some of those things. So an introduction to infrared, and then we'll dive into the quick start guide. So again, the quick start guide is the place for people who are relatively new and want to learn about infrared, and they got to get going. You don't want to read a 322 page book before you get started. You want to get out there and do some shooting. So the quick start guide gives you an opportunity to do that, runs through all the key factors, and then later on in other chapters we can get much deeper. So we'll cover the equipment that you need, and again, some of this will kind of presume an unconverted camera, but we'll talk about that a little bit. So cameras, lenses. If you're unconverted, you're probably going to need some kind of a tripod, shutter release. What kind of filter do you need? Here's some recommended filters. Then next we dive into the shooting. So what happens when we're shooting? And what are the settings that you're going to need? So what's the ISO, shutter speed, aperture, walking through all these settings. And alongside of this, there's an image that I shot here in Yosemite Valley that basically I shot with an unconverted camera and walked through all of these settings. And so you'll be able to see, this is an example of the camera that's set up, and you'll be able to see all the settings and then the final shot that I took. So setting a white balance, kind of the nuances there. There's a ton of stuff. There's like 2 full chapters of the book on white balance. So there's so many questions that people have about white balance. So literally I've got an entire chapter later on that covers white balance while shooting, and then a full chapter of white balance while editing. Plus there's a discussion of white balance in the quick start guide. So plenty of information about white balance, which people have lots of questions about. So once you've captured this shot, then you can get into the editing process. And so I walk through kind of step by step in Photoshop of what you would do in the editing process. So first of all, talking about monochrome processing, and then talking about color processing. So dealing with the DNG file, making sure that you have the profile you need, getting the layers, kind of all of those details, all the tools you need. Kind of go back here to some of the Adobe downloads you can get. So there's a ton of these call out boxes in the book that are places where you can get more information outside the book. So it could be downloads that you might get from Adobe. It could be references to things on my blog, but there's a ton of these throughout the book. So these little blue boxes are call outs. Let's see here. So just a comment from Andrew: watch several of your other infrared photography videos. So informative. I bought the book since I know it's going to be invaluable. Thanks for taking the time to create this. My pleasure. For discussion later from Steve: appendix edition, lenses that work best for IR avoiding hotspots. This is the last section. There's actually, we'll get to that, Steve. There's in the equipment section, there's a page on lenses. So we'll get to that. Okay, so continuing on with the quick start guide. Let's see. So this is moving through kind of a step-by-step process to walk through these things. And one of the things that we did, and this is kind of a nice little thing that worked out really well in collaboration with the designer, is that whenever there's a step that relates to an image, we kind of highlighted that. So you can see the number 4 here and the number 4 here. They kind of reference to each other. So we know that if you're reading along, this step relates to that image, and then you can kind of drill into that image. I wanted to make sure that because this is tricky, and sometimes the videos work really well because they're very visual, but sometimes print works well, like a book or a blog, because you can get a step by step and you can take your time in working through all of those steps. But the tricky part is you want to make sure that you're tying those steps to visuals, and so that's something that we've tried really hard to do in the book. So working through setting a white balance, all the steps there, some shots from Photoshop, the channel mixer, doing your first color swap through the channel mixer, and kind of walking through that process. And then finally getting to the final image that's displayed. So again, this was an image shot with an unconverted camera and a Hoya R72 filter. The suggestion being that you don't need a ton of equipment, you don't need a ton of stuff to to get started in infrared, you just need that one filter, some patience, patience when shooting, and patience when editing. So before we continue on, I'd like to kind of talk about some of the things some of the ways you can kind of navigate the book. And this will be really useful for anyone who purchases the book and wants to use it as a reference guide. So you've seen me sort of navigate through with these up-down arrows to go between pages. You can also, I can also use the keyboard, shortcuts to just up-down arrows, or even maybe left right arrows to go through this. Each section of the book will have a reflection, so a comment, some thoughts that I have on the book itself, on that chapter, and some things to think about. Hopefully some things that are inspiring. So you can go up here to the these other controls. In this particular dropdown in Adobe Acrobat, I could change. I'm currently doing fit 1 to a full page. I could change to a fit width for scrolling. So if you had a big screen and you want to widen this out, you can see it's really wide now. And now instead of it being individual pages, it's just sort of one continuous scroll. And as I go into the next section now, for some of these that are designed to be a panorama on the final book, it might look a little awkward, but that's a one way to look at it if you want to, if that works best for your monitor visually. And then there's read mode, which will actually remove some of the other stuff on the screen. So like Control or Command H, if you want to make the book even bigger, you can do that. I'm going to switch back to one single page mode. And then the other thing that you can do is you can, of course, zoom in. Now that doesn't mean much here. Let me go up to a page where this is the foundation section. So getting into some of the Y's and whatnot. So let's say I wanted to zoom in on this chart that looks on these different types of electromagnetic radiation, and I wanted to get more information. I can zoom in here, and I can make sure you've got a cursor and a hand. I can use the hand, kind of drag around here, and then I could make this full screen. So if I wanted to learn a little bit more about some of these details. And this is really nice because in various places throughout the book, you may find that you want to just focus on one column. And you can zoom in and use this hand to kind of navigate through. It was really important to me that there'd be a focus on legibility, readability, for those of us who are, having some challenges with eyesight. We don't want to, our hobby, which requires eyesight, to be impacted by this. And so I wanted to make sure that it was definitely very readable. So you can use these zoom controls. Another thing that you can do, let me go back to 100%. So as you're navigating around the book, there's a couple choices that you have. If you use the thumbnails on the left, this little icon on the left, you can basically see a bunch of pages, and you can scroll around on the left and jump to a page that you like. So that's one way to kind of navigate. There's also bookmarks, and the bookmarks are really nice because they allow you to jump right in. So if you know, I know what I want to go to equipment, and I want to go to lenses, and we want to answer that question, we could jump in and dive right to that section. If you know how things are, if you understand the sort of the structure of the book's pretty simple. So if you know what you want to look for, you could dive right in and go to a section through the bookmarks. So I really like the bookmarks. And then finally, the other thing, because I want this to be a reference book, the other thing that you can do is search. So if you click the search icon, I could click a search parameter. So here I was previously searching for 830, which could be a common filter. And then that will highlight all the text in the book is text searchable. So image captions, text, everything is text searchable. So if I want to look for 830, I could use this and hit next and jump around to different pages and talk about different things. And what do you know? Here I'm on the infrared filter section, and after a few clicks, I've found a bunch of recommended 830 nanometer filters. So you can type in whatever you want into this section, and it'll help you to jump around. So a whole bunch of different ways, whatever your preference is for sort of navigating. You could read linearly straight through. You can use the bookmarks. You can search. All kinds of different ways to both view and find information. All right, so that's some stuff on navigation. Let's get back to where we were previously. We were in the foundation section. And so let's kind of, I think I've got a question here from Lee. Said, hi, Rob. I converted a Nikon 7200. Do I need to shoot with the mirror up or not? Can you color swap and shoot everything in Lightroom? Is the book downloadable only? Can you get a paper copy? So let's take these one at a time. Do I need to shoot with the mirror up or not? So you don't need to flip the mirror up in a DSLR, but the thing you need to be aware of is that in a DSLR there are actually two different focusing systems. There is one focusing system where when the mirror is down, that light goes, as light makes its pathway up to the viewfinder, typically the optical viewfinder or digital viewfinder. That part of that light is split off into a focus sensor that will detect focus based on a calibrated focus for visible light. And so if you use that focusing through the viewfinder, your focusing will be wrong in infrared. It won't be perfect, and your images will be soft. When your mirror is up, and that could be because you've locked it up or because you're in live view looking at that screen on the back, the image is coming directly to the sensor, and it's using a different focusing system. And this is covered in the book as well. We'll get to this, and I'll show you what chapter this is in. It's a different focusing system that's direct on the light and doesn't use that visible light calibration. So when you're shooting infrared, you don't need to lock your mirror up per se, but you do need to make sure that you're focusing off the back, the live view mode, and not focusing through the viewfinder. So that's really critical. Can you color swap and do everything in Lightroom? Yes. So you can. It's a little trickier. So this gets into my color swap profiles, which are covered in a later chapter. We'll talk about those a little bit later. That's in the developing section. You need to either build those profiles or download them. And I've got instructions for all of that on my blog. Is the book downloadable only, or can we get a paper copy? So right now it's electronic downloadable only. I'm in the process of working on a print version. So I've gotten one quote from a printer, getting some more quotes. It's a little challenging to do a book like this that is full color, high quality, but a short print run. And so I'm not going to run 10,000 of these and have pallets of books in my basement. And so trying to find a balance between those is a little bit tricky, but I'm definitely committed to making a print version of this. I've just got to find the right balance with the right printer to be able to make it happen. And as soon as I do, that'll happen. So I'm researching this. My layout designer has a ton of contacts in the print industry. He's researching it as well. We'll find something. So eventually we'll have a print version. Okay, so let's continue on. So we're in the foundation section, and this is kind of background. Like if you're interested in why infrared, what is infrared, how does it relate to visible light, you can get into kind of the science here. I kind of geeked out a little bit on this stuff and put all of this in here because I'm fascinated by the sort of the science and the background by it. But of course you can read this or not read it at your leisure. A little reference to thermography, which a lot of people confuse with infrared photography. So a little bit of discussion there, some discussion about ultraviolet light. And so kind of getting a perspective of where this all fits. You can see here that we're primarily focusing on not only visible light, but a little bit out into near ultraviolet and near infrared is what our digital sensors can see. And that's kind of the space we're in, even though, infrared could encompass, it's a very long range. Ultraviolet doesn't go too far because it actually gets blocked by the atmosphere. So the part that our sensor sees of ultraviolet, you go a little bit beyond that, there's nothing to see anyway because the atmosphere blocks it. All right, so a little bit of the science there. So next up, talking a little bit about so my reflection on the science. Next chapter is styles. So what I wanted to do here, I wanted to come at the infrared from two different angles, because this is very confused. This can be very confusing to people, like the concept of what what filter produces what style. And what I wanted to do was hit it from two approaches, because I don't think either approach by itself is sufficient. So I come at it from a style approach, and that's here in this foundation chapter, styles. And then I also come at it again in the infrared filters chapter. So that's the other angle. So styles is stylistically, what am I looking for in an image? And then infrared filters in chapter 3.2 is about what filter gets me to a certain style. So let's start with styles. And so what styles does is it breaks down the different types of images that you might commonly see. So a traditional infrared, which is that, kind of the original version that was, mainly because it came from the limited choices you had with film infrared and using, these 7200 nanometer filters, and then the early digital that used the same filters to basically create, do a color swap, create a blue sky with some muted color. So traditional infrared. Monochrome is a style that you can get from shooting any kind of infrared or any kind of visible light even. So, and so we'll talk about the different ways to get to a monochrome image, but of course it is a style in and of itself. And then deep infrared. And so deep infrared to me is what I mean by deep infrared is infrared only. So it is only infrared light is hitting the sensor. There's no visible light coming in. And what does that image look like? And so we'll talk about that style. And then of course, what filters will get you to that style. Color infrared is very popular these days. So it's basically anything from, about a 470, 512 up to 665. You could include traditional in this, but it's basically the colors that you're seeing in the very colorful infrared images, and what do those look like. Full spectrum, maybe not as popular of a style, but what happens when you don't use any filter on a full spectrum converted camera and the light comes in? What are the different kind of characteristics that you'll get in an image? There are some subjects that it could be useful for. And then, of course, this chrome style. So this is exemplified by IR chrome and other dual band pass filters that use innovative techniques to allow two different sections of wavelengths to pass through to the sensor, allowing blue light to pass through for the sky, but then allowing infrared light to pass through, and a combination of these creating colorful images. So this is another particularly modern, the most modern style of infrared. And of course, one that requires probably the least amount of post-processing. And then, of course, ultraviolet, which is, of course, not infrared, but I wanted to include it because it's similar equipment. It is similar, sometimes similar styles, but definitely the other end of the spectrum, and much more challenging, in fact, than infrared, because not only are the filters more expensive, but the amount of light needed is much greater. There are lens challenges. So there's all kinds of, challenges that you have there. You kind of have similar challenges as to infrared, but also very different challenges. So I didn't include some information on ultraviolet here, although just kind of brushing the surface on ultraviolet. Discussion of false color. One of the things that's fascinating to me when you get into infrared, and people, especially when people get started, they want to know, what's the right color, what's the right white balance, and this sort of concept of something being the one I'm striving for. But the reality is that there is no such thing as the right thing. It's all false color. And if you wanted to get super metaphysical about it, you might argue that color doesn't exist. Hey, that's the title of the book. That is what really kind of drove a lot of the thinking here, which is to say that there is no one right choice. Color is subjective, color is emotional, and color isn't real. It's false. And there's this concept of false color, which says that we're going to show colors that aren't what we normally see. But of course, if color doesn't really exist in the natural world, then you might even make a case that all color is false color. Okay, I'm getting too far down that. You can read more about it in the book if you like. I just tend to annoy people when I start getting too deep into that stuff. So to wrap up the styles, there's a list of the styles available, and then which which camera you'll need, which filters you'll need. So a lot of direction about, how you want to achieve that. So if you come into infrared from a new perspective and you say, oh, I really like this particular style, how do I achieve that style? Then you'll have a guide to be able to head down that path, because there are, so many choices that you can go down. Section on color temperature, trying to explain this very complicated topic of color temperature, what it is, and why it relates to infrared. I'll give you the very short version. The very short version is that we normally measure color temperature in photography from about, say maybe 2800 Kelvin is indoor incandescent, and somewhere around 5600 is outdoor sunlight, and the color temperature of infrared is actually around 900 Kelvin, which is a lot lower, and that's what makes a lot of this stuff very challenging, especially in Adobe products. So if you're curious about why it's challenging and why we do the things we do, why we do the color shifts, then the background is contained in this chapter. So getting into talking a little bit about what's different between photographers and blacksmiths and that kind of stuff. So and the challenges that we face, and also the creative opportunities that you have between apply the different ways to apply color balance and how you can do that in your images. So here's an example of two radically different styles of the same image simply by changing the color temperature, the color balance. Okay, so next up is the equipment section. When I do get to the print version, we'll have these very nice panoramas that go across 2 pages as the border of each section. So that turned out really nice, and you can't quite see it here, but once we get to the print version, that's going to look really nice, because a lot of the book was we designed the book to be printed. We designed it for both print and screen, but we really wanted it to be printed, so a lot of those things were taken into consideration up front. So the equipment section, so first up here is converted versus unconverted cameras, kind of talking about the pros and cons of these, and what it means to have each of these. So I literally list through, here are the pros of unconverted cameras, here are the cons of unconverted cameras, because there's no absolute. A lot of people will think you have to have a converted camera, and you simply don't. You can go a long way on an unconverted camera. It's limiting. There are limiting choices, but there's trade-offs to be made everywhere. So we'll walk through all of these in the book, and then talk about converted cameras. What are the pros and cons of converted cameras as well, and dealing with the different conversion options, kind of all that kind of stuff. So walking through a lot of that in detail. What do you want to convert? Mirrorless cameras, DSLRs, point and shoots, all kinds of different considerations. There's also an interesting kind of in my research, I've come across a lot of dedicated cameras for either infrared or astrophotography, and I kind of wanted to list them out here as kind of a reference, because I think it's kind of fascinating. You've got some astrophotography cameras that Canon puts out every 3 or 4 generations. They'll put out a camera that has a hydrogen alpha filter on it. So they've done a number of those over the years, over the last 15 or so years. You've got some specialty infrared cameras that have been created, like Fujifilm did the same thing with their X-T1. They put out an IR version, and with their GFX 100 they put out an IR version. Of course, we have the Kalari Pocket, which was a modified Canon point and shoot camera. So there's some interesting opportunities, and then of course Sigma has some interesting cameras as well that are basically full spectrum that you can use. They were in a sense, they were almost the first cameras to have the sort of clip-in style filters in them, with the hot mirror filter by default. So they're very interesting cameras. They're not they're not so much available new anymore, and Sigma's been talking about putting out a new camera, but it hasn't quite, it's not quite out yet. So that'll be interesting if that comes out, and if it's the same style, and if it has their new sensor, their new Foveon sensor can have any benefit to infrared. That's another thing that's always fascinated me is, and I've tried to research this, but I've never quite been able to sort of pin it down, which is doing comparisons between a Bayer filter, an X-Trans from Fujifilm, and then the Foveon sensor, the Bayer sensor, the X-Trans sensor, and the Foveon sensor from Sigma to see are any of them particularly better or worse for infrared. And so far I haven't seen that that's the case. The Foveon one, although, is so radically different that could be interesting. So getting into infrared and ultraviolet filters in this section. So talking about what these filters are, how they work, and then kind of breaking them down by the categories, similar to the style section. So the infrared only filters that would show you deep filters. I've got a number of filters listed in all of these. Color filters. So what filters will get you good results for color? What's good for, say, a 590 nanometer or an orange filter, a 550 nanometer? What filters will get you these results? Of course, the multi-band pass filters such as the IR Chrome. And then LifePixel has one as well with their dual. They have a super blue infrared, which is their dual band pass filter. And then ultraviolet filters, which are, block out visible and infrared light, showing only ultraviolet light. This photo is interesting because you can see that there's sunscreen on the face, but missed part of the center of the face, and it's something you wouldn't see normally in visible light, but you can see it, plain as day in an ultraviolet image. Okay, so let's move on here. So then I've got a section on visible light filters, and you might think, why would we talk about visible light filters? But there's actually some interesting topics here to talk about, and so covering UV filters, hot mirror filters, which could be used to turn a full spectrum camera back into a normal camera. Neutral density filters, which can get you some really interesting results, even in infrared. Some of these techniques that you might use for long exposures in traditional photography can apply to infrared as well. So you can use some of those filters. You can also use them for wide apertures. It's really hard to take a wide aperture shot. If you get a wide aperture lens like a 1.2 or a 1.4 f 1.2 f 1.4 lens, it can be really hard to shoot them wide open in broad daylight because there's so much light coming in. And so the using a neutral density filter could allow you to use that option. A little bit about astrophotography. Okay, and then in the next section, filter form factors. So this is talking about the different ways that we have filters, because there's so many choices. And I know this is kind of frustrating. It's frustrating for me. I'm sure it's frustrating for all of you as well. So you get into this, and then it's like, well, do I buy external filters? Do I buy, what size do I get? Do I need step-up rings? Do I do these clip-in filters or flange filters? There's so many choices that are available, and it's difficult, and you've got to find solutions that match your system. And so I've got some information here that'll help you see what the options are that are available as you look into the marketplace. It's always changing. There's always going to be new filters, and especially the growth of, say, clip-in or flange filters has grown dramatically in the last couple of years. So I can't anticipate all of that, but I can help you, give you some information about how to think about what you want to buy and what you want to use in your system. So some of my recommendations for filters are in chapter 3.5. So avoiding, inexpensive filters, what you can do if you want to try before you buy, and then a guide that says, if you want to shoot, what do you want to accomplish, and then lead you to a filter for that. So if you like vivid color saturation, shoot a 550. If you like subdued color saturation, shoot a 720. If you like a monochrome, so whatever you like, this can help guide you to a particular type of filter. You don't need to buy every filter for every system. You may want to lean towards a particular style that you want to develop, and that's perfectly fine. And this can help guide you to get the right filter for those choices. All right, I'm going to try to pick up the speed here because I'm only about a third of the way through the book, and I haven't even gotten to the biggest sections yet. So again, this is those guides. So if you want, I want normal color saturation, I want subdued colors, I want monochrome, a lot of information to help guide you on what's going to get the look that you're looking for. And then finally, as we mentioned earlier, Lee, here's the section on lenses. And so, I cannot create a comprehensive list of every lens that's good or bad for infrared. But what I can do is talk about all the considerations, and that will help guide you. It's helped to guide me in my lens selection. Then you can combine that with online resources, like on my blog, where I'm constantly updating particularly Fuji lenses, but also links to other sources for other lenses as well, because everybody's shooting different systems. But talking about the different considerations of what is going to affect hotspots, the fact that aperture is going to affect them, and focusing. There's it used to be, in the film days, they would put a film focusing spot, the infrared index mark, right on these lenses. And I've got a number of vintage lenses where you can see a red dot or a red mark that shows you where to focus in infrared. And so it's fascinating how we've come. In some ways, infrared was more respected back then because it was actually built into the lenses. Not that those are necessarily accurate anymore for what you're shooting today, or shooting them on a, say, converted to a mirrorless camera, but it's kind of fascinating how it's evolved. But focus is a consideration, the type of lenses. Without getting into too much into the science, there's 3 major ways that lenses are created, and each one of those ways will affect how much chromatic aberration you might have. You want to think about filter threads, because of course that's going to affect if you're using external filters. And then we get into hotspots, and talking about all the different considerations for what's going to affect hotspots. So that could be primes versus zooms, modern lenses versus vintage lenses, wide aperture versus narrow aperture. There's all kinds of different considerations. And so, like I said, while I can't list out every possibility, what I can do is point you in the direction of saying these are the things that have a tendency to produce more or less hotspots. And then you can use that information to help guide your purchasing. That's basically what I've done. So for example, I've never had a vintage lens that had a hotspot. I might find one at some point, but I've never had one. I've noticed that primes have fewer than zooms, but again, these are going to vary a little bit between different manufacturers. There's some good guides here that you can use, and then you can read the book on the general guidelines, the things that are going to impact hotspots, and then once you have that knowledge, then you can look to the online resources, look for particular lists that say this lens is good or bad, and then use that to guide how you're going to, the lenses you're going to select or the lenses you're going to try. Okay, so we're into the next section. I'll open up on the bookmarks here. Shooting. So talking about a number of different subjects that relate to shooting. So first up is focus. As we alluded to earlier, focus is very challenging. There's a lot of different considerations. Focus is different. Those 3 types of lens structures are different. Diffraction is different. There's all kinds of stuff that's different. So I cover all of these details. Everything from the infrared index mark to the impacts of, starting to talk about a little bit about diffraction. That's coming up more in the next chapter. Manual focusing, focusing on unconverted and converted cameras, some of the tools you use for focusing to really help hone those in. I've developed a really, a couple solid methods for focusing, both with autofocus cameras and with manual focus cameras, that make it so it's second nature. So even when I'm doing manual focus, it's not typically a problem. It's not time consuming. It doesn't take a lot. There's a lot of tools and techniques you can use to simplify the focusing process. And that kind of, when I think about infrared photography broadly, it's those kind of details that, especially early on, you get bogged down by, because focusing, there's a whole chapter on focusing, there's a whole chapter on this, there's a whole chapter on that. You can start to develop techniques that take all of everything you've learned there and simplify it, so that when you're out shooting, you have a very simplified approach, and you don't let that one topic derail you. And that's one of the things that I've tried to do with the organization of the book, is to help you, if you're struggling with a particular topic. Let's say you're struggling with focusing, just read that chapter. Don't read it, just go in and read that chapter, and then figure out what's going to work for you in terms of focusing. I'll show you what the options are. I'll show you what I do, and then you can come up with a solution to simplify how you handle focusing going forward. And I've basically done that with kind of every one of these things. Is how do I simplify this? How do I simplify that? How do I simplify this? So that when I'm out shooting, I'm not thinking about all of these things. I just have a process in place, I have a plan in place, and then I can just shoot. I can focus on, the subjects going forward. Diffraction, one of my favorite, sort of nerdy subjects that I've done a couple of videos on now. So some details here and some images to talk about, the impacts of diffraction. So again, just something to be aware of. I'll occasionally get people that are sending me, test shots and asking for an observation. I'll look in the metadata. I'll see that they've shot with F16, F11. I'm like, which you could do. There's nothing wrong with that, but I know that that's going to introduce diffraction. I'm very. This is another thing that this is another one of those things that when I talked about simplifying my process. Once I did this research and I learned it, I know that with this camera, I always shoot f/6, f5.6, and I don't change it. And it simplifies my process. I don't have to think about it too much. Yes, I might occasionally, open up the aperture to try something different, but for certain cameras, so for my crop sensor camera, I just always shoot 5.6, and then for my medium format camera, I pretty much always shoot 5.6 or f8. And knowing those things, I don't need to think about diffraction when I'm out in the field and shooting. I already know the impact, and once I've noted, I can simplify it down into a simple rule that works for me, so that I can just go out and shoot, and I know I'm going to get sharp images. So you can read about all these details, at your leisure, and then come up with these sort of simple ways to make your shooting better. So lots of details, and then ways to do testing if you want to test your particular setup for diffraction. So all of those instructions are in here. But even aside from that, I've got a straightforward guide if you don't feel like doing your own test shots and you're just like, give me the shortcut, Rob. Here's the shortcut. So it's all in here. So next up is the first of those two chapters on white balancing. So white balancing on shooting. Do I need to do it? Under which conditions do I need to do it? How important is it? Got some call outs here, some different explanations of some nuances you're going to see in the editors. So all of this kind of stuff. Why would you do it? Why do you need to do it? Why is it such a big deal? Why do people tell me I have to do it? When do I have to? When don't I have to? So all of that kind of stuff. Here's a really good example of one of the reasons you might want to set a white balance in camera is just to make it easier to see your image. So instead of it being a wash of red, you've got a little bit more nuance in your image, and you can see a little bit more. Now, obviously, this image on the right is not going to be my final image, but maybe it's a little easier to see. It's a little easier to see my subject and to make out some details rather than that wash on the right. So I might set a custom white balance in camera to give me that preview, even though that's not going to necessarily determine or limit my choices of white balance when editing. So lots of good details on information. I get a ton of questions about white balance, which is why it's a pretty big portion of the book. Some discussion about different things that relate to shooting that are maybe less technical. So light, color, your subjects, how you pre-visualize images, what is infrared light going to do to different subjects, and how can you kind of plan for those and think about those. One of the challenges when you're out in the field and you're trying to pre-visualize an image is what am I going to get? I'm shooting this thing. What am I going to get? And what's the impact going to be? Like for example, one of my observations is that you can get, really you might look up at a sky and think, oh, that's kind of interesting. But you shoot that sky in infrared and you might get a dramatic result. And understanding that the way that infrared light is going to work with clouds is going to be a little bit different. It's going to create a little bit more contrast between the clouds and the sky. That might open your eyes to seeing compositions in the sky that maybe you didn't see before, didn't think about. Maybe you viewed the sky as a supporting cast member of your landscape images, but maybe sometimes it needs to be in the front. Images like this can show how you can do that. And so sometimes looking at the sky, in fact, there was an image I put on like Instagram and Vero today or yesterday that was another example of this. So really focused on, the clouds and the way that the formation of the clouds became a big part of it. And so starting to visualize the different, not just the way that infrared light works with foliage, but the way it works with other elements. How does it work with the clouds? How does it work how does it, sunspots and other nuances that you can think about. How does it affect neutral stuff? How does it work with people? What is the effect on people? Many of us probably don't shoot a lot of people in infrared, but there's actually some really interesting results you can get in certain circumstances. So it's something that's worth considering. This is, that last page and this page on the left shows some example of some diffused infrared light. And then of course here we have a ultraviolet image. A question from Malcolm. Hey Rob, converted to a Sony a6000 to 720 nanometer. Your free downloads and white balance have been great and fun to use. Surprised at the amount of color change I can get. So thanks for that. Yeah. I think that excellent. Glad to hear that. You can actually, I don't want to say I avoided 720 for a long time. I shot really heavily 590 for a long time. It was just my go-to. And then I switched over to I did a couple shoots in 720 and I was really pleasantly surprised. It was not what I was expecting. I mean, yes, there was less color saturation, but it really added kind of a different depth to my image because the color was less dominating. So yeah, so many different choices there to use and great results you can get. So glad to hear you're getting good results with that. Different lighting conditions, of course, are going to affect your infrared images. I've seen dramatic differences between a broad daylight and the shade. Well, dramatically will affect color temperature and white balance. Something to be aware of there. You're going to get a lot less in the shade. You're going to get a different color balance. You're going to get a lot less contrast as well. So things to be aware of in different conditions. Not necessarily bad. Here's a perfect example. I was out. This was in Muir Woods, north of San Francisco. And which it's tough to get there. You got to book an appointment. There's limited access. You get there, and it was pouring rain the day we went. But you know what? Make the most of it. Find interesting subjects. And you can, even in overcast skies in the morning, dreary, there's still opportunities. You just have to look for them. So, but there'll be a difference. It'll affect the final result of your images. It might affect color, things along those lines. Let's see. So and here's another. This is another interesting example. This was an image I shot. I actually went back and checked the data in the exact time that this was shot. And then I went back into one of those calendar online apps and found the day and figured out when the exact sunset was at the day that this happened. This is from Cades Cove in the Great Smoky Mountains. And I went back and found the exact time of the sunset at this location, and then the time that the image was shot, and it was exactly 10 minutes after. And because I wanted to see like what, we're so accustomed to shooting in broad daylight, what does this look like? And so some examples of different lighting conditions. And then at night, I've been shooting more infrared at night, and the results can be really awesome. And so I would encourage everybody to try shooting at night. I've been pleasantly surprised at how vibrant the images are, and how much contrast and punch they have. And the other thing that I'll tell you is that night photography is a great thing to do in the winter months, because the sun is going to set earlier. You're going to have less daylight, but you're going to have more nighttime. And unless you're somewhere really cold, it was actually pretty cold when I shot this. You're going to have some time in the evening where it's going to be dark, but it's not like you're out in the middle of the night. If you do this in the summer, of course, it's going to be more challenging. You've got to wait till much later. But night stuff is a really good subject in the winter. If you're thinking to yourself, what can I shoot in the winter? There's no leaves out for me to shoot. Think about night shooting and what kind of possibilities that could bring. A question from Johan, EBUB version, my ebook reader. So the book is a PDF, so it's going to be best viewed in something like Adobe Acrobat. I looked at EPUB versions and Kindle and all of that kind of stuff, and what I read was that some of those book reading things, just they're I have a Kindle, one of those that I'll read like fiction books on and some nonfiction, and they're really good for that. They're really good for alt text. But when I started to read about people who were trying to use them for books like this that were more instructional with lots of images, I saw lots of people having challenges with layout and design and how the images looked. And I just, that really turned me off from that. And so as a result of that, we're sticking to the PDF format. It'll look good on a desktop, laptop, tablet, maybe not on a phone. But the other benefit is that it'll help us when we get to the print version. So we'll be able to much quicker get to a print version of this. So PDF for this, and I think you'll enjoy the results on your screen. Okay, moving along here, trying to get through the shooting section. Okay, so on to developing. So the big section of the book, where there's just a ton of information here. So start off. Let me change my bookmarks here so I can follow along here on the side. So the first section is on monochrome processing. Now, in this section of the book, I really wanted to. There's a lot more step-by-step guides that happen in this section. So if you're struggling with processing, then this is definitely section 5 is the place to be. So here's a chapter on monochrome. So what is monochrome? How like in particular when you're looking at Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, what in Photoshop, what do these different things mean? Sometimes I'll say that some of the language that Adobe uses, I find frustrating. Sometimes they're consistent, sometimes they're not. So they've got something like treatment, which is a black and white or colors, kind of a broad category, but then sometimes they confuse the profiles and presets and enhanced profiles, and some of these things can be very confusing. So I try to simplify these as much as possible where there's any confusion. Question, when is the print book out? So I don't have a date yet. I am working with, we've gotten a quote from one printer. I'm working with my designer, Tony, to get some other quotes. The challenge that we're facing is that, I want to put out a high quality product, and a high quality 320 page 4-color book is pretty expensive to print. Especially at what I'm expecting to be the relatively low volumes that we have. I don't know if you all have noticed, but we're in a bit of a niche when it comes to photography, and some of the resources out there are not as widespread as other. If you were into, say, portrait photography or wedding photography or other areas, there's lots of resources, and potentially lots of sales for things like that. We're in a little bit small of a pool here, and so that's going to make it challenging to figure out the right blend and maybe even finding the right printer to do a print run that we think is reasonable, that will get a print copy in everybody's hands, but not leave me with a pallet of 10,000 books in my basement, which I want to avoid. So we're working on it. I don't have a date yet. A little bit of a balancing act. We'll get through it, and as soon as I know when the print version is available, I'll put something out in my newsletter. So if you haven't, go to my blog. Links are all in the description, and you can sign up for my newsletter. The newsletter will be the first place that I let people know to buy the book. So continuing on through the monochrome developing, so a lot of the nuances, how to use your histogram, some of the details to be aware of. The thing, if you are into color processing, don't skip the monochrome chapter. The monochrome chapter is like a foundation to color. It's almost like you start with you understand monochrome, and then you build color on top of it. So even if you're not interested in outputting monochrome images, you really should read the monochrome chapter to build that foundational knowledge, because then everything else afterward is going to build on it. If you want to do monochrome, there'll be some great information here as well, but definitely stuff to think about. And some of the things like clarity and dehaze, I've got some examples of things they're much easier to see an example of those in monochrome. So a little bit into the masking tools, which are fantastic in these newer versions of Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw. So details on the tone curve, which is very impactful in infrared. So definitely something you want to learn about and spend time on. And especially because you can do even interesting color stuff with the tone curve that you may not be aware of. If you dip into the individual channels, you can create curves that will influence the colors. So there's some really interesting creative possibilities that exist there in the tone curve. So lots of capabilities, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the other programs as well. So I'll touch upon other programs that might be particularly good at a certain kind of processing. So for example, what can you do in Photoshop when it comes to monochrome processing? They've got a couple different layers, a curves adjustment layer, black and white adjustment layer, some different things you can do there. Luminosity masking, that could add a lot of oomph to some of your processing. And then of course something like the Nik Collection Silver Efex Pro, which is a really nice program for getting an impact on, I've used it a lot for black and white images. It pulls out a lot of detail and can really add a lot of punch to black and white, to monochrome images. Darktable and Raw Therapy are both excellent open source programs that both have tools for dealing with monochrome, so those are good as well. Okay, so diving into digital camera profiles. So of course, as you all know, because you're here, profiles can be a challenge. Understanding them can be a challenge. Creating them can be a challenge. Hopefully you've all gotten past all of that at this point, either through the ability to create your own or through the infrared profile pack. But this is a whole chapter on basically why you need them, what programs you need them for, what programs you don't need them for, because you don't need them for every program. And so kind of breaking into those details of how you would get those, how you create those, or how you can download them. So again, a call out here with all of those details. If you want to create your own, if you want to download the free ones from the infrared profile pack, you can do all of that. So all the tools that you would need here to build your basically color temperature shifting profiles, so that you can do infrared in Adobe and some other products as well. It's not just Adobe. So moving on to white balancing, as promised, here's the next, the second chapter on white balancing. So getting into the details of white balancing when editing. So in addition to the white balancing that you did in while shooting, this is all about the white balance you would do in editing. I spent a lot of time reorganizing these things. Eventually it was one chapter, and then it kind of got broken into two chapters because there's just so much information about white balancing that you need to be aware of. And getting all of those details and not only get the details, but putting them in the right context, I thought was really important, so that you knew what are the things I need to be thinking about when I'm shooting, what are the things I need to be thinking about while I'm editing, and otherwise they can get kind of convoluted, all work together. Okay, moving on to color processing. So this is like, color processing is kind of the basic concepts around color swapping. So talking about the process of color swapping, the different methods of color swapping that are available, some of the different styles you can get through different forms of color processing. So here's an example of just the different variations you can get by playing with the green channel in the channel mixer. So from not making a change to shifting it to the blue, shifting it to the red, and then shifting it in both directions. So there's all kinds of creative possibilities you can get just with the channel mixer alone. Detailed breakdown here of the step-by-step settings you want to use. So if you want to build your own, here's the process you can walk through. For some people, you might find that, some people just want to download an action, a Photoshop action or a LUT, and just, get to it. Some people want to understand the background of why this happens and how it happens, and this will help you. This is that foundation that'll help you understand what's actually happening in a channel mixer to be able to get the results that you're looking for. Other methods like invert, hue swap, other things you can do to tweak color. So all your basic kind of getting you set up for color processing in Lightroom and Photoshop, and the different types of things that you can do. Of course, a lot of these techniques are available in other editors as well, and I've got a separate chapter to cover that in its entirety. Here's a chapter that focuses entirely on one method that you can use in Lightroom that is easy to use without any profiles. And so walking through kind of a step-by-step guide of how to recreate this, you can walk through, you can create the process, and then you could create a preset to simplify it in the future for yourself. So there's the preset. So that whole process. And then the enhanced profiles. So these are the sort of LUT-based enhanced profiles, the ones that I've got a ton of instructions on here in my blog to help you understand how these can streamline your workflow in Lightroom or even in Camera Raw. They'll work there, but mostly in Lightroom, so that you can do a lot of your work. Now, this is tricky. It took me a long time, a lot of research to develop this method. And so it's not simple. Like there's a process to setting all of this up. And it is something where if you follow this guide step by step, you can create these yourself. You can also order them if you like. That's fine as well. Either way, but it's a very complicated process that basically combines those color shifting profiles that you get from the DNG profile editor, combines those with LUTs that are created in Photoshop and do a variety of things in LUTs, uses a hidden capability in Photoshop to combine them together and create an enhanced profile, so that you can then do a lot of this work within Lightroom itself. So super complicated setup. The beauty of it though is once you get it set up, it's a breeze. Once you get it set up, you're into Lightroom, and you can just pick the profile and it's done. So it's specific to a specific camera, but once you get it set up for that camera, it's a breeze. So very, very, very great process. I don't want to say I would have given up on infrared if I hadn't developed that, but I wouldn't shoot as much for sure, because I know the process can be so cumbersome of color swapping, jumping programs, having extra images, making it more difficult to preview the quality of my work before I edit them. So many different things that have a factor, and being able to do it quickly within Lightroom has just removed a hurdle for me and allowed me to just shoot more and get more great images and not worry about I could go out, if I shoot a lot today, it's going to make more work for me later when I have to edit. I don't want that. You don't want that. So make sure you find ways to improve your workflow. Color balance and color grading is all about some of the nuances that you can get into to improve the quality of your images. Sometimes infrared images, have a cast, these colors that can really dramatically affect an image. Sometimes good, sometimes negatively. Sometimes they can detract from an image. And so some of these techniques that you can use can help. They were created, of course, to kind of enhance images in an additive color way, but we can use them in a subtractive way to remove some of these casts and create some better contrast and more realistic images. And so lots of interesting techniques that you can find that will do these in Lightroom, especially with this new, you've got the new color grading panel that replaced the, what was it called, split toning a few years ago, which was only basically, it was similar, but it was only like highlights and shadows. Now you've got, with color grading, you've got highlights, shadows, midtones, a lot more control. These tools are great not only for that kind of subtractive processing, but I find them really great for monochrome images as well. I do a lot of very subtle color grading to my monochrome images. In fact, sometimes I'll do a color grade to a monochrome image and then I'll walk away to let my eyes, forget about it, and then come back to it, and I'm like, oh, a little less, but it just a hint of it in there that you can see. So I do a lot of those in monochrome as well. And then a call out here to Pixelmator, which has some crazy good color balancing tools. Okay, so now a section on raw editors, and I've spent a lot of time testing and using a ton of different raw editors, and I wanted to share all of that information because as photographers, there definitely can be a sense of FOMO, fear of missing out. Oh, I'm not using that other editor that everybody says is fantastic. And I had that. And so that's what kind of led me down this path. But there's also the fact that we're infrared is a limiting factor. It's a constraint. And so having this information will help you get over the FOMO and find the editor that is best for you and your workflow, because there's not any one editor that's best for everybody. Of course, you've got Adobe products. You've got Adobe Photoshop, which is kind of the king of it can do anything to your images, but it's also has some complexity, and also it's a great standalone editor, but it's not a great catalog manager. So that's a consideration. You've got some new variations for mobile devices, Photoshop Express and Mix. These are really interesting in terms of their capabilities. They're not full-fledged versions of Photoshop yet, but they get a little bit better each time. I definitely have found some uses for them. You've got Photoshop Elements, which is this crippled version of Photoshop, which I just probably recommend most people stay away from unless you've already got it, because it's okay, but it's just not great. And for the cost savings you get, there's just better alternatives. Of course, Lightroom is probably my main tool, because I just like the combination, the flexibility of it being a very powerful catalog manager. I probably have 70 or 80,000 images in my Lightroom catalog at this point, and I can quickly find something based on a star rating, a location, a person, a camera, a lens, filter information that I put in the metadata. So there's all kinds of ways that I can find information. And so I just find the catalog aspects of it to be extremely powerful. Now, of course, as an editor, it's great too, and it's gotten even better with the masking that's been released the last year or two. The masking capabilities are fantastic, and they've really reduced my dependency on Photoshop. There's also mobile versions that you can use. I've used Lightroom for iPad a great deal because it can sync images. I can do some of my work on the desktop. I can do some of it on mobile, and it's shared. I'm not like starting over. There's some limitations, but it works pretty well. Same thing with the iPhone. You can get it on an iPhone or an Android device. I actually will use this to show images to people or to look up metadata for images. I find that really useful. The cloud stuff. There's a ton of really good open source tools that are available that work really well for infrared. Darktable in particular is just an absolute fantastic program. And the color rendition that you get out of Darktable is really good. It's really good. My only knock against it is it's a little complex. The controls are a little bit harder to navigate, but if you're willing to invest in learning Darktable, it can be a very powerful tool. Ty says, I agree. Enhanced profiles make IR editing fun. I edit 90% of my IR photos on the iPad and in Lightroom only. Exactly. That's a good point, because that's another thing that enabled me to do more with the iPad. So like I'll talk really briefly about my workflow. It's like a lot of times I'll import my images. I still like Lightroom Classic, so I'll import my images on the desktop. I'll create a collection of those images that's then synced to the cloud. Then at that point, I can edit in either. I can edit in Lightroom Classic, or I can edit on the iPad. And so a lot of times I'll use the iPad for rating my images, it's a 1-star, it's a 4-star, or doing some basic edits or things like that. And so I could do sometimes I could do, 75% or more of my editing on the iPad. And then if I go back to Lightroom Classic, then all those changes are there, and I could continue an edit, or I could do some more fine detail work or whatever. So I love that flexibility of being able to bounce back and forth between them. So back to the open source editors, I can definitely recommend Darktable, but you're going to need some patience with that. Raw Therapy is another excellent tool with some of these tools have amazing capabilities. And if you're more technically inclined or want to learn more about demosaicing or these types of things, then you're going to get options in Darktable and Raw Therapy that you're not going to get in Lightroom. You might find a half a dozen different demosaicing methods in these tools, and I'll not get into what demosaicing is, but so much capability that exists in these tools if you're willing to invest in them, there's definitely possibilities there, but a little bit tougher. GIMP is the classic sort of open source alternative to Photoshop, which, with all due respect, it's again a powerful program, but a very challenging interface. The interface has not advanced in the last 20 years as much as other programs, so definitely can be challenging to use in that space. I would lean towards Darktable and Raw Therapy for people who are looking for either an open source solution or a free solution. Those two programs are great, and you could always use GIMP to maybe do some cleanup work. Some other programs, Digicam is an interesting program that's come a long way. Affinity Photo is a really excellent editor. It's probably also one of the best mobile editors available. So there's a lot of great tools. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any catalog management, but a really strong tool. ACDC is a tool that's getting better and better all the time. It's kind of a low-cost tool. Capture One is kind of what I think of as like the king of FOMO, because Capture One is like, this is the one that, you know, all the programmers, all the photographers out there are like, oh, if you're not using Capture One, your images don't look as good. And so this is the one that always drove my FOMO. But the problem is it's just not great for infrared. So it's a great editor. It really is. It's a really good tool, but it's just not great for infrared. It's got challenges. So if you already own it for other things, then, you know, definitely good. But DxO Photolab, a great product that actually does use profiles that you can use with Adobe, as does Exposure X. New version of that out. Version 7 came out recently. So a lot of possibilities there. Luminar had another new version that came out. Luminar is interesting. There was some bugs the last time I looked at it, but it has one of the best interfaces available. It's got a really nice, intuitive, easy to use interface. I got to test the latest version in depth, but definitely been impressed with the interface and the tooling. Very easy to use. And then ON1 is kind of the leader in terms of, if you're looking for something that's low cost but still has great capability in infrared. Great tools for infrared. Pretty reasonable price. You don't need a subscription. So for somebody who's on a budget, this is a great tool to look at, and I've got some more details here. Pixelmator is really a really good tool for the Mac and the iPad. If you're in the Mac environment, it's an excellent tool with top-notch interface. The tooling is just, you know, pretty. The tools are pretty. If the sliders are pretty to look at, you know, it's like I shouldn't be drooling over the sliders instead of my images, but that's how good the interface is in these tools. So moving on to color space. So I've got a section that talks about the sort of the science of color space, and this, you know, it's a more advanced topic, but it's really important if you, especially if you, it may not be important if you're just sharing your information on screen. You might just be sharing all your images in sRGB, whether you know it or not. But if you're printing, it's really important to understand color space. And if you're doing sort of any other medium that could leverage different color spaces, the other thing that's good about understanding color spaces is it could help you to buy a monitor to understand what these color spaces are and what they support. It can help you to know when you're buying a good monitor or not, because a lot of the monitors you'll see will be, you know, 99% sRGB or 100% Adobe RGB. What does that even mean? Well, if you read this chapter, then you'll have an idea of what that means, and it can help you to buy a better monitor that will make editing your images better, because the Pro Photo RGB, the biggest color space of them all, is what most programs use as their default color space for editing. That's where you're going to do most of your work. You're going to have the most color flexibility before you output. And so having a monitor that can support that is going to give you the best editing experience. So understanding color spaces can be really good when it comes to both monitors and how you output your images in terms of, is it social media? Is it print? You know, etc. Little historical stuff on lab color, which is a really interesting technique that you can use, a color space you can use that kind of separates things out differently. I think this was really more useful. It was really useful in the early days of digital, where the resolution wasn't very high, and you could separate out things to increase sharpness, but still interesting if you want to learn more about how to do that, how to increase sharpness using the lab techniques. Then I've got those details here as well. So how to manage and manipulate colors in all the different programs, and all of the kind of details that you need to get into that. Okay, so moving on, so wrapping up. So this is, kind of my final reflection on going forward, and then we're moving into the appendices. And so we've got a variety of different things here. We've got a reference of profiles, so profiles of all of the images that are used. Throughout the book. So you can, if you see a profile name, you can come to the back of the book and say, oh, how did I get to that spot? This is the case. Even more of them here on the next page. So a lot of details on that here. And I'll say we're getting near the end here, and so I'm probably going to wrap up the live stream in the next 10 minutes or so. So if you have any questions, now's the time to get them into the chat so that I can then answer them once we finish kind of walking through the book. I have a question from, unfortunately, a name I can't pronounce because it's probably Slavic based. Hi, Rob. Maybe you could send me a digital copy for translation into Russian. So I've gotten a request for Russian. I've gotten a request for French. I have to figure out how we want to manage this. I would love to be able to offer translations of the book to different languages. But I've got to think about the best process to do that and how we get that done, because unfortunately I don't speak all of these languages. And it's a challenge because, I've worked really hard to make sure that this is a quality product in terms of the information, the images, the layout, everything. I've worked really hard to make it a quality product. And if I get into translation to different languages where I can't validate the quality, I would want to make sure that I have some capability to do that I could trust. And so I just need to spend more time thinking about that. And if anybody has, further thoughts on that, you could email me or reach out to me with your ideas, because I would love to be able to get this into a variety of languages. I've done some language translation in kind of my work life in the past. I haven't done any recently. So I know there's a variety of ways we can go about it. So let's keep that conversation going. If you want to, reach out to me through email, I've got a link in the description or my website, and we'll figure it out. I would love to be able to do that. I just don't know how at this point to deal with the language conversion. So any other questions people have, get those into the chat now before we wrap up. Okay, so here's all of the profiles used as a reference. This is really interesting, a section that came late in the development of the book, which was how to get to a style based upon, or what style do you get by combining a certain kind of camera with a certain kind of filter. And I thought this was really interesting because it allows you to, again, that sort of reverse engineering and going at this the style thing from multiple directions. So how do I get to a style? What equipment do I need? Or if I have this equipment, what style can I get? Or what styles am I limited to? I want to make sure that you can go at this from multiple angles. And this appendices is what allows you to be able to do that. And so using this as a reference, I think, can be really useful. Let's see. Kevin said, I came in late. The link for the purchase is the PDF version, not a future print version. Correct. That is correct. So right now for sale is the PDF version. The print version is not yet available for sale because it doesn't yet exist. And I want to figure that space out before I offer that for sale. So I'm working on it now. It's in progress. I know a lot of people want a print version. A lot of people have asked me about it, and I want a print version too. But I've got it's the challenge of wanting to put out a high quality 4-color printed book with lots of photos that's 320 pages and still try to control the costs, which is difficult. And so I'll figure it out, and we'll find a solution that gets a print version out one way or another. But it's going to take me a little bit more time. I wanted to get the ebook version out as soon as I can. So yes, the current version that's for sale is the ebook. As soon as I know more about the print version, I will put that in my newsletter. So sign up for my newsletter. There's links for that in the description or on my blog. for getting that information. Okay, the glossary. So a section where you can everything that I've researched and learned about all the different kind of terms, what they all mean, stuff that I didn't even know before I started this process, and getting into the details of different kinds of lenses and different kind of scientific terms. A lot of that stuff is in here. So if there's a term that you're like, what is a cold mirror? What does that mean? Or what's a LUT? You can look those all up in here, and many of them will have either references to other terms in the glossary or even chapter references where you kind of see what's happening. So lots of good information here about some of the background on some of this information. So if you just want to know about what a term means, you can just drop here into this section and the glossary and kind of figure out what it is. If you're not sure what gear acquisition syndrome is, then here's the place to find out. There might be a little bit of humor sprinkled in here and there. I try to put a little humor in every now and then. So they're little hidden gems throughout the book. So lots of stuff here in the glossary. Let's see, getting all the way through X. There's no Z's. I didn't have any Z's. We only got up to X in the glossary. So if you guys can think of a good Z to add that has to do with infrared photography, let me know. The bibliography is a section of where a lot of places where I collected information from to kind of support this. So lots of good references here to other sources to get information. And then further reading is, if you're really, really interested in diving into a topic, a lot of these topics, what I found with infrared is that a lot of these topics they intersect with infrared photography, but then they're broader, so they might be broader into optics, or other kinds of transmission or other kinds of things. And so there's only a sliver of that crosses over to infrared. So we talk about it in the book, but if you want to learn more about that thing, you can dive into further reading. There's a lot of references to Wikipedia, if you want to learn about the history of the lab color space or different things, or why we use the diameter symbol for lens diameter measurements, all kinds of things. All kinds of little nuggets you can find. So I've got a reference to all of these deep dives into the Kelvin color temperature scale. So all kinds of stuff like that. Backgrounds, history, with the Orton effect. Where does that come from? What's the history of that? What's a superachromat? What does that mean to me? Does it matter? Should I care if my lens is a superachromat? Does it affect infrared? It probably does. So you can find out more information in the book, because there's a chapter on that early on in lenses, and then you can get more information here by diving in. Let's see. Oh, we don't need to see that. That's enough of that. Oof. Oh, about the author. Here's some of my favorite pages here near the end. All right, so we're to the end. All right, so there's a question here. Let's see. You have a metallic print in your room. From experience of printing IR, do particular papers lend themselves to IR more than others? Yeah, so let me switch my view here so you can kind of see. I have 3 prints, metal prints. So I have one here, which is the same one from the cover of the book. And then I have this other one, which is a reflection of the Half Dome in the Merced River in Yosemite Valley. And then another Yosemite image from the Valley view. The infrared print's really good on metal. The colors really pop, and things, they look really great. I've also printed on what kind of paper is it? It's a here, I'll show you. We'll go off script here a little bit. I use this Canon luster paper. So this is the 13 by 19 sheets and I have a Canon printer, and so I printed a lot of infrared on that kind of paper, and it looks really good as well. So that paper looks good, metal looks good. I haven't tried canvas to see what a canvas looks like. So that would be something interesting to try. But from what I've heard from other people, they're particularly pleased with the metal prints and what you get out of those. So I can definitely recommend those. I've been very happy with these. Let's see. I'm getting my XT20 converted right now from Kalari. Excited to try the setting you use when it arrives. Excellent. Love my X-T20. I still shoot with it. I've got a bunch of cameras now, but I still shoot with my X-T20 because it's lightweight and it's simple, and I love the controls on it, and the images look fantastic. The images look way better than they should for a camera that size. You could probably say that for a lot of cameras these days, but love the X-T20. And what's really cool about that is what's fascinating about infrared is that you can get a camera like that is 2, 3, 4 generations old. We don't need the latest and greatest. You don't need the fastest autofocus. You don't need the latest, greatest low light sensitivity. You don't need all that stuff they're jamming into the latest cameras. So what's the difference between, from an infrared perspective, what's the difference between the X-T20 or an X-T2 and an X-T4 or upcoming 5 or the XH2? You're not going to notice the difference, really. You're probably not going to notice a difference because you don't need all of those features to shoot infrared. So these great cameras from 5 years ago can be, especially mirrorless, can be fantastic infrared cameras. So excellent. You'll really enjoy that. Thinking the print book has consideration been given to having access to the PDF when buying the book, or will it remain exclusive? Yeah. So I've considered, nothing's off the table yet at this point. So I'm trying to explore what the different mediums mean, and what it means if somebody buys both of them. I haven't come to that conclusion yet because I need to figure out what the costs are for the print book, because to be brutally honest about it, it's expensive. I've already run some quotes for the runs that I need, and the cost of just printing the book is pretty high. It's about the cost that you'd typically pay for a high-end photography book just to print it. And so, I can't go into this losing money for sure. So I got to figure out the nuances here, and then figure out, are there opportunities to bundle it with the PDF version or bundle it with LUTs, or who knows? So yeah, definitely thinking about those things, and all of those options are still on the table until I settle in on the actual printing and figure out what those kind of costs are going to look like. Okay. All right. So let's see here. Let me jump back to the beginning using the handy dandy bookmarks. Back to the cover. Okay. So thanks everybody for stopping by and taking a look at this. I'm super proud of being able to put this piece of work out. It took 23 months to do this, not continuously, of course, but bursts of time here and there. But it took a lot of time and a lot of effort, a lot of research, a lot of photography, a lot of collaboration, and I'm really proud of the results. And I definitely want to make sure that this is practical for you, which is why that's in the title. It's a practical guide, and I want to make sure that the quality is there. So I'm really happy with the result, and I hope that everybody finds it interesting as well. And if you buy the book, please, there'll be a link in the receipt, or you'll get a link later on to offer me a review. I would love your feedback, and especially and that includes constructive criticism as well. So if you find things that you think could be better, if you find errors, any of those things, I am more than welcome to those things. I've actually already put out a version. I'll give you a peek here. You can see here, this is the first edition version 1.1. So many people who are buying now are getting this new version, and everybody who bought previously has gotten a link to download this new version because it was a couple minor things that we found but we felt were important enough to correct. And so I'll put out new iterations of the book if I find more issues that are worthy of that, and especially that'll help us to work out any bugs, if you will, before going to the printing process, which is a little bit more permanent. So really appreciate your feedback. Thanks for stopping by, and if you have any questions about the book, or about anything related to infrared photography, then drop a comment here, drop a comment on any of my videos, or shoot me an email, and I'd love to be able to help you out so that you can have a really enjoyable time exploring infrared photography. All right, thanks so much, everybody.